Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to Growing Through It, a podcast dedicated to bringing you clarity so that you can harness your curiosity and be the creator of your life. Hosted by me, Shanae Rowe. Hello, my happy little cherubs, and welcome back to the potty. Thanks for joining me. This is episode 12, and it's part 2 of a 2-part episode all about self-expression. So if you haven't listened to the first part, give it a listen. It's all about sort of what self-expression is, conscious versus unconscious self-expression, and sort of the ways that we can feel like safe and confident and comfortable in ourselves, so that we can then like express our most goofy and wholehearted and fun-loving self to the world, and sort of what happens when we live our lives from that place. So go give that one a listen if you haven't already. But yeah, so this is part 2, and I wanted to split self-expression up into 2 parts because so when I was traveling in my van, it was a very concentrated amount of self-development that was going on, and I was just really loving being like goofy and quirky and just like fully accepting myself and loving myself for that part, and then like not having fear expressing, being silly and goofy and dancing and stuff like that. And for a while I actually thought that's what self-expression was in its entirety. It's being able to be ourselves, even if that self is silly, like we're able to express that, and that's sort of conscious self-expression. But I had a thought, it was probably a couple weeks ago now, that self-expression, like there's another side to self-expression, and that is sort of being able to share ourselves and our stories and our thoughts and opinions when we aren't okay. So it's not just, self-expression is not just being like, I am a really weird and wacky human being, so I'm going to express myself however that feels right for me. Like self-expression is also, I'm not doing okay. Here are the things that I struggle with, and here are the things that I'm learning about myself that maybe I don't so much agree with anymore or doesn't feel right to me. And I'm going to share that with you and be vulnerable and be honest with myself and with you. And I think that is self-expression. And I think that is a really important part of being able to show up as ourselves, be ourselves, express ourselves. And when we do allow ourselves to be vulnerable and be open in that way with other people, then it creates this beautiful space for us to connect with other people, and we can let our walls down, and we can learn that we can be loved as we are. So yeah, that's sort of like what I've been thinking about over the past couple of weeks, about like this other side to the coin of self-expression. It is about being fun and silly and goofy and owning that weird side, but then it's also about owning and honoring our shadow side. So that's sort of what I wanted to talk about in this episode, part 2. It's about honoring our shadow, creating space for our suffering, and learning to share our darkness without fear. Because I think with this other side of, expressing ourselves vulnerably and authentically, we have to make space for our shadow self, and, our inner child, and the parts of ourselves that they aren't as beautiful looking and easy to understand, and they're not as fun loving. And these are like the parts of ourselves that maybe we feel are harder to be loved by other people. So I want to talk a little bit about like our shadow side. What is it? What does it even mean? I don't know. Like I hadn't learnt much about like shadows or inner child or anything like that. But I think when we do start to learn about these things, a lot of our behaviors and things start to make sense. So yeah, I want to talk about like what our shadow side is. And I see it as the parts of ourselves that are still in progress. Like, it has a lot to do with our repressed traumas, the things we learnt about, the things we grew up believing. I think our shadow side has a lot of control over our like self-limiting beliefs and the way we self-sabotage and prevent ourselves from achieving all the things that we want to do. I think that's sort of what a shadow side is. Like, it's the behaviors that we partake in that still feel out of alignment with ourselves, and our shadow side sort of frustrates us because it's like the way that we act that prevents us. It's sort of self-sabotaging our future self. And I like to think of like our shadow as the wounded parts of ourselves that resurface in certain situations, right? They're the parts of us that get triggered in social interactions, or someone can say something and it triggers a response in us that we don't really have control over. It's all of these all of the behaviors and the ways we acted out when we were young and growing up that's coming to the surface, and that they can sort of like trigger us and elicit emotional responses that we don't relate to anymore. And I think like an example of this is when like you're in a situation, say you're hanging out with new people, and for some reason like something that they do causes you to react in a way that you sort of don't really you don't enjoy acting out the way that you do. So for me, for example, like when I get asked about myself, I sort of shut down sometimes because I don't want to open up too much and like reveal too much about myself. Because growing up, like when I felt like I was expressing myself and saying how I felt, like it was either ignored or elicited like a response in someone where they got angry. And so I unconditionally learnt that if I'm asked about myself, maybe like probably don't express yourself or say how you feel or do anything like that. And like noticing that you're acting from like a learnt behavioral pattern that kept you safe, but then also acknowledging that it doesn't keep you safe anymore. I think that is when like that is our shadow side. And that awareness is sort of like our current self, sort of acknowledging that that's not us anymore and that's not serving us and that's not bettering us. Yeah, so if that example sort of makes any sense, I don't know if it does, but that's sort of like how our shadow side operates, and that's how we acknowledge it and notice it. It's these the ways that we behave and the things that we say, it all comes from like past actions and behaviors that we develop to keep us safe and to sort of create the safety within our world, but now it doesn't serve a purpose anymore. And I think being able to acknowledge that and share that and honor that about yourself, like, is self expression. It's the other side of the coin of self expression. I think it's super duper important to be able to honor that part of ourselves, to accept that we don't have to be happy and bubbly and fun all the time. And I think, like, culturally and socially, we have this belief that humans are meant to be happy. We're meant to have a smile on our face. We're always expected to put our best foot forward, whether it's like in job interviews or going on dates or meeting friends for the first time in a while. We always like, we put on this front, and it's this perfect, beautiful, visually appealing and enticing image of sort of who we are. And it's all fun and well if we're expressing ourselves and putting on, we're being funny and silly and playful, and we know how to have a laugh and have a good time. And that's fun if we're like truly expressing ourselves like that. But there's this other side to self-expression where we're sad sometimes, and we're depressed and we're unhappy, and being able to express ourselves and portray ourselves as truly a full, a fully multifaceted human with all these complex parts, we need to be able to honor those sad parts of who we are, or, the parts of ourselves that are still in progress, that have a lot of limiting beliefs and really frustrating ways that they self-sabotage. So I think like being able to express that really vulnerable, raw, emotional part of ourselves is just as an important way to self-express as dancing in public, or screaming at the top of your lungs in a field, right? Singing your favorite song. Like, there are two sides of self expression, and they both are equally as important as each other, and they deserve a space in our lives, right? And I truly don't think that we are being our whole full self unless we are able to express the darker parts of ourselves and our suffering and our stories and the hard parts of our lives. But I think like one of the things that really stops us from feeling safe to honor our shadow and to share those really vulnerable parts of ourselves with other people is because we have fears, right? Somewhere along the way of our lives, we've developed a fear of something. If we are expressing, ourselves in our vulnerability, in our sadness, and in our pain and our misery, I think yeah, we definitely develop these fears, and it can be like abandonment, or, feeling that we're unlovable or unworthy or undeserving, or we fear that people are going to reject us if we leave, if we're like sort of expressing who we truly are. And I think we develop these fears because somewhere along the way in our life, we've we've kind of we've actually lived these experiences, and we fear maybe abandonment because something has happened in our life at some point where we lived through something, and the response was maybe not feeling accepted for, sharing something we're really upset about, or, telling people about our fears. Some part of us, right, has lived through the experience of feeling rejected or abandoned when we have opened up. I think it's super important when we do have these fears of, not being loved when we are at our worst. That I think that it's so important to create a safe space for those like limiting beliefs and really, uncomfortable behaviors. And like that's what I mean about honoring our shadow. We need to create a safe space for ourselves to be able to express how we're feeling, how all these, not so great emotions and things. We need to create a safe space. I think how we do that is first by accepting ourselves fully in our darkness. You know, like I was saying earlier, we're expected to sort of hide the ugly parts of ourselves. We feel like we need to shy away from expressing that because we've been taught to, or we sort of inherently believe that we are, something is wrong with us. And I think to express ourselves as a multifaceted being, we need to know all the parts of ourselves and love all the parts of ourselves, right? I think really the only way to move through being comfortable sharing our shadow side and our wounded side to, the external world is by just accepting ourselves fully, by owning who we are and what we are. And I think the only way to fully be able to accept our shadow side is to um make peace with the parts of ourselves that are still in progress, right? We don't have to be perfect all the time. We don't have to be happy all the time and fun and crazy, and we don't need to be expressing ourselves in the most upbeat way possible if that's not how we feel in the moment. And I would personally, and I honestly would just love everyone to be more accepting of, when people are having a bad day. We have such a culture here, like in Australia, I really notice it, that when people are sad, when people are having a bad day, more acceptable to take the piss out of them, or like to be mean or degrading or something to them, than to actually like create that space of vulnerability and ask how like they're going and what they're feeling and what's on their mind. I think it's so sad, and I think maybe that plays into sort of the role of why we have this fear of abandonment or rejection or feeling like unlovable when we do share our pain and our sadness, which is really sad because like the world is a much better place with everyone here just like expressing themselves and being open about what they've been through and the hard times of their life, or what they're currently struggling with, or what their biggest fear is in the moment. And like it is so hard to then open up to people that we want to be close with and have these authentic relationships with people if it's been taught that we are not worthy if we aren't having a good day. And I think lots of things can like play into that. Like it doesn't just have to be like socially we're taught this, but also like it comes down to family life as well. Like what were your parents like growing up? Were you allowed to be sad? Were you allowed to, share your emotions? When you told your parents how you felt, did they listen, or did they blow you off, or, ignore you or get angry at you for having those emotions, right? And I think it's so, so hard for a lot of people to openly and outwardly share if they're not doing well. And it's so limiting and oppressing for everybody. And this is what I mean by how I thought, self expression was being fun and happy all the time. And yes, that is part of it. But I think the harder part to accept about self expression and loving ourselves and being able to share our truth with the world is we actually have to love our wounded parts, and we have to know those wounded parts and feel safe enough in our own skin to share that with other people, regardless of if we feel like they accept us or not. Life is all about embracing the light and the dark. It's all about wholeness. And we as humans can't be whole unless we're expressing ourselves when we're being goofy and silly, and also having the bravery and the confidence to express ourselves when we're feeling sad and alone, or anything that we don't deem like positive or happy, right? I think some really good ways to be able to accept ourselves fully in that darkness, fully embrace all the parts of ourselves, whether they're good or bad or ugly or amazing or, perfect, even though perfect doesn't exist. But yeah, there some ways that I really like is sort of inner child work, reflecting on our childhoods and really paying attention to how certain conversations and experiences affected us emotionally, right? What response did they bring about in us? How did we react when our parents got mad at us? Like, what are the ways that we learnt to cope when we were growing up, right? And then sort of change the narrative. If you felt really unseen growing up, and, every time that you tried to reach out to people to find support, you didn't feel acknowledged or heard or seen, change the narrative. How would you show up for yourself now? Right? How would you give yourself the love that you didn't when you were younger? And I think when we can learn to reparent ourselves and accept ourselves when we aren't having a good day, when we're feeling sad and unhappy or overwhelmed or anything, then that's how we come to accept ourselves. That's how we come to get over that hurdle and that fear of rejection or being unlovable, of being abandoned when we're expressing the rawer parts of ourselves. I think sharing our mental and emotional load with other people without shame, it creates a space to process it and invite solutions. We can turn to each other for comfort and advice, and we get to build this beautiful community because we're being raw and we're being vulnerable and authentic, right? We get to create this cycle of self-awareness and abundance because when we express ourselves when we're sad or when we're struggling with something, we gain clarity through conveying that outwardly, and also because of the solutions that are brought to us from other people, right? So it's sort of this cycle of, struggling with something, accepting that about yourself, being able to articulate it then just with yourself and process it inwardly, and then to be able to articulate it and share it with other people. That's this beautiful cycle of self-awareness that has been created from self-expression of our shadow side and our dark side and our suffering, right? And we slowly break away from the fear of not being accepted in our darkness and in our shame and in our, the vulnerable, raw, earthy parts of ourselves. When we can accept that in ourselves first, it's a lot easier to feel like other people are going to be accepting of it, right? Because it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable to be able to share how we're feeling with other people, but doing so invites so much connection with other people, and then we get to learn more about ourselves through others. I think we learn a lot about our inner worlds when we're alone, but being able to articulate our inner worlds and how we feel outwardly really solidifies our ability to know ourselves and express ourselves. We learn so much from being able to articulate how we feel with other people. And I think articulating our pain and struggle is self-expression, right? So there is these two worlds of expressing ourselves, go be fun and silly and dance and, have a merry time, but also don't be afraid to share how you feel, share something that you're really struggling with, right? We're all going through something different in each and every moment. Like life is always a dance with our struggles. Always. Like if you think about your life, there in every single chapter, there is something that you are struggling with. All right. You wouldn't be able to enjoy your life if you weren't also struggling with something simultaneously. And what we struggle with changes all the time once we learn how to live with that pain, or to overcome it, or to turn it into something else. But we're always sort of noticing something about ourselves and working on that within ourselves, right? And like it's hard to go through that alone. And I think being able to share those things with other people, it's really uplifting, because just one person, sharing a fear that they have right now, or sharing like some sort of limiting belief that they're struggling with, it invites other people to do that too. And it invites other people to express their most authentic self. So yeah, that's just something that I've really been thinking about lately, about how self-expression, as much as it is about, being weird and really embracing our weirdness and sharing that, it's also about honoring our pain and honoring our shadow side, and accepting that that is still part of us, and expressing that is just as equally healing and important as sharing our weirdness. And even though like being weird is more socially acceptable than being like sad or vulnerable or upset, it still deserves to be shared. Like your pain still deserves to be shared with other people, and you deserve to take up space for feeling big emotions and struggling with big things just as much as you deserve to take up space, having fun and running on the beach at sunset and being goofy, right? Both of those ways of expressing ourselves are so important, and they're very different, and they're very scary in their own ways. But yeah, I think accepting ourselves fully allows us to express ourselves fully, and as always, it just brings so much abundance and alignment and beauty and love into our life. And I think that's one really important thing about being able to accept our darkness, is that when we do love that we struggle and we do really admire everything that we've been through, we start fearing abandonment less and less. And we stop believing that our sadness doesn't deserve love. We start to believe that we are deserving no matter if we're having fun and expressing our goofy selves, or no matter if we're expressing our sad selves or our unlovable selves, or, our unhappy selves. So, yeah, I think articulating our pain and struggle is just as much self expression as it is to be wacky and weird. And yeah, I hope that you guys have learned something, or something has really resonated with you from this episode, part 2 of self expression. As always, if you enjoyed it, give it some love, give the potty a rating, share it with your friends if you're really enjoying these episodes. But yeah, it means the world to me that you guys listen along. And even though I still find podcasting so scary, I really love doing it, and I really love getting my thoughts and ideas out there, and yeah, hopefully helping someone somewhere who's listening to it. But yeah, that is all from me today for this episode. The world is waiting for you, so get on out there and enjoy your big, beautiful life. Bye.